After my house burned down on a Tuesday night in November, my brother offered me a couch to sleep on and then changed his mind before I even packed a bag. I found work cleaning offices on the overnight shift, and every morning the same mail carrier walked me to the bus stop so I wouldn't have to wait alone in the dark. Last Thursday, he drove right past my stop without slowing down and grabbed my arm when I reached for the door handle. "Don't get off here," he said. "Your brother's been waiting in that parking lot for 40 minutes. Look at what I found in his car. The fire started in the walls." That's what the investigator told me afterward. Electrical fault, old wiring, nothing I could have done differently. But standing on the sidewalk at 2 in the morning watching the second floor collapse inward, I didn't think about wiring or fault lines. I thought about the photograph album stacked in the hall closet and the wooden box my father made me when I turned 16 that held 37 years of birthday cards and report cards, and the letter my wife wrote me the day our son was born. All of it gone in the time it takes to brew a pot of coffee. I'm Holt, 61 years old. I retired early from my job as a warehouse supervisor after my left knee gave out completely, and for 3 years I'd been living quietly in a 2-story house in Decatur, Georgia, the one I'd bought after my wife passed and my son moved to Portland. It wasn't lonely, exactly. It was the kind of quiet that you learn to make peace with. I had my garden and my woodworking tools in the garage and enough in savings to last me another decade if I was careful. The fire took all of that in one night. My brother lived 20 minutes away in Roswell, in a house that had 5 bedrooms and a finished basement and a 3-car garage that held 2 cars and a boat neither he nor his wife had taken out on the water in 4 years. Wendell had done well for himself, commercial real estate, mostly, buying and flipping properties in the suburbs north of Atlanta. His wife, Claudette, ran a boutique interior design studio that served the kind of clients who described their homes as estates. They had no children and plenty of space, and I had known them both for over 30 years. I called Wendell at 3 in the morning from a neighbor's porch. He answered on the second ring. "Holt, what's wrong?" I told him. "Fire, total loss. Standing outside in a borrowed coat watching the last of my walls come down." "My God," he said, and for a moment he sounded like the brother I remembered from childhood, the one who used to follow me into the woods behind our parents' house and ask me to identify every bird by its call. "Are you hurt?" I wasn't. Okay, listen, come here. Come stay with us tonight. We'll figure out the rest in the morning." I took a cab to his house, and Claudette met me at the door with a robe and a glass of water, and the careful expression of someone who had already had a private conversation about this. They put me in the guest room, which had its own bathroom and a television I didn't turn on, and I lay there until sunrise thinking about all the things that were ash now. Wendell made breakfast. We sat at his kitchen island and I talked about the insurance situation. I had a policy, but my agent had already told me the payout process would take months, and the coverage on the structure itself was based on a valuation that hadn't been updated since I bought the place. I was looking at a gap of somewhere between $40,000 and $60,000 between what I'd receive and what I'd need to find a rental while I rebuilt. Wendell nodded a lot and said very little. Claudette refilled my coffee twice. That afternoon, while I was in the guest room looking up numbers for the Red Cross and FEMA assistance programs, I heard them talking in the kitchen. I wasn't trying to listen. The house was quiet and their voices carried. "It could be months," Claudette was saying. "I know, Wendell. We have the Hendersons coming in March. We need that room. That's 3 months away. And what happens in 3 months? Is he going to be on his feet in 3 months?" A pause. "I don't know. We are not running a shelter. That is not what this house is." I closed the door quietly and sat on the edge of the bed and looked at my hands. I had my wallet, my phone, the clothes I'd been wearing when the fire started, and the neighbor's coat that I still needed to return. That was all I had. Wendell came to talk to me after dinner. He sat down in the chair by the window and looked at the floor the way he used to when we were kids, and he'd done something he didn't want to explain. "I've been thinking," he said, "about the situation. I don't want you to feel like we're pushing you out. But Claudette and I talked, and we've got some commitments coming up, and the honest truth is, we're not set up for long-term guests. It's not that we don't want to help." I looked at him. "How long do I have?" He had the decency to look ashamed. "End of the week would be good. It's Wednesday, Wendell." "I know. I'm sorry. I wish things were different." I left Friday morning. Wendell pressed $300 in cash into my hand at the door, which is the kind of gesture that's supposed to feel like generosity, but actually just tells you the precise dollar amount someone thinks you're worth to them. I took it because I needed it. I thanked him because I was raised to. The Red Cross put me up in an extended stay motel in Doraville for 2 weeks. It smelled like industrial cleaner and someone else's cigarettes, but it was warm and it had a microwave and a deadbolt. On the 4th day, I walked to the closest employment office and told them I needed something that started immediately and didn't require me to stand on my bad knee for 8 hours. They offered me an overnight mail sorting position at a regional distribution center for the Postal Service. 42 hours a week, $11 an hour more than minimum wage, benefits after 90 days. I took it. My first week, I met Felix. He was a letter carrier who started his route from the same facility, arriving every morning at 5:30 to load his truck just as my shift ended. He was around 45, black, broad-shouldered, with a laugh that came from somewhere deep and surprised you every time. He'd been with the Postal Service for 19 years and knew the name of every dog on his route and most of the owners. "You look like you need coffee," he told me the first morning he saw me, and handed me a cup from his thermos without asking whether I wanted one. That was Felix. He didn't ask permission to be kind to you. He just was. He found out about the fire when I told him I couldn't stay late to help a coworker because I had to make the last bus back to my motel. "The bus," he said. "Where do you live?" When I explained, he shook his head slowly. "That's 45 minutes by bus," he said. "I drive past Doraville on my way home. Come on." I told him he didn't have to. He told me to stop talking and get in the truck. For 6 weeks, Felix drove me home every morning after our shifts ended. I started bringing him coffee in a thermos of my own, and then sandwiches, egg salad on whole wheat because he'd mentioned once that it was his favorite. He always acted surprised every single time, like he hadn't been expecting it. "Man," he'd say, unwrapping the wax paper with genuine appreciation. "You didn't have to do this. You didn't have to drive me home for 6 weeks, I'd tell him. "That's different." "How is it different?" He'd think about it seriously, the way Felix thought about everything. "I guess it's not," he'd finally say, and take a bite of his sandwich. We talked during those rides. About his kids, 2 daughters, both in college in Tennessee, both of whom he was visibly proud of in the way that men who've worked hard for their families carry that pride. About his wife, Annette, who taught 4th grade and coached a girls' soccer team on weekends. About the neighborhood he'd been delivering mail to for 15 years and the ways it had changed. He never pushed me to talk about my family. I told him about the fire and the motel and the insurance process, which was moving slower than I'd been promised. I didn't mention Wendell. Some embarrassments take time to say out loud. 2 months in, I found a studio apartment in Chamblee, a 5th-floor walk-up that cost me $700 a month and came with a view of a parking garage. I could afford it if I was careful. I wasn't comfortable, but I wasn't drowning. I thought I was rebuilding. I thought the worst was behind me. I should have known better. The first sign that something was wrong came on a Tuesday morning in January. Felix pulled up outside the distribution center while I was pulling on my coat, and he had an expression I hadn't seen on him before. Careful, watchful. "I need to tell you something," he said as I climbed in. He told me that the evening before, while delivering a package in my old neighborhood in Decatur, he'd run into someone he recognized from a description I'd given him. A man in a silver Lexus parked outside the burned property, talking on his phone, taking photographs of the foundation with what Felix described as the kind of methodical energy that means it's not the first time. Wendell drove a silver Lexus. "Did you hear any of it?" I asked. "Enough to know he wasn't calling his insurance company," Felix said. "He was talking to someone about permits, about lot value, about moving forward with the acquisition before the end of Q1. I sat with that for a long moment. Acquisition, my property. I told myself there were explanations. Wendell was a real estate man. Maybe he was helping me, looking into options for the land. But the way Felix described it, the way Wendell stood there with his back to the street, voice low, photos from every angle, it didn't feel like helping. Over the next few weeks, I tested the water. I called 3 companies whose names I found through the county job listings, positions I was genuinely interested in and qualified for. All 3 came back with a polite decline, and 2 of them, when I pressed gently, admitted they'd received a call raising concerns about my history. One said the word reliability. Another mentioned substance abuse. I hadn't had a drink in 11 years. Someone was making calls, and there was only one person who knew my full professional history, my references, my network in Atlanta, and who had motive to keep me struggling. I didn't confront Wendell. Not yet. Instead, I called his office under a different name and asked to speak with his assistant about a commercial property inquiry. His assistant, cheerful and professional, confirmed he was in meetings all morning, but offered to schedule a consultation. I asked casually whether the firm had any active acquisitions in the Decatur area. She said she couldn't comment on pending transactions. Pending transactions. That evening, Felix came by my apartment with 2 cups of takeout soup from a place near his route. He'd been doing that lately. Checking in, not making a production of it. He sat in my one good chair while I sat on the bed, and I told him what I'd figured out. "Your brother," Felix said slowly, "is trying to buy your land while you're too broke to rebuild on it. That's what I think, and he's making sure you stay broke." "That's what I think." Felix was quiet for a moment. "What do you need?" I told him I needed someone to help me understand what I might be missing. What was on that land that made it worth Wendell's attention right now? Felix had a friend, a woman named Beulah, who worked in the county recorder's office and had spent 30 years watching what happened to property values when developers started circling a neighborhood. He called her the next morning from his truck while I sat in the passenger seat. She pulled the records on my lot while we waited, and what she found made my hands go cold. 6 months before the fire, the county had approved a rezoning request for the corridor that included my street. Commercial mixed use. 3 developers had already filed preliminary interest letters for the block, the land my house had sat on. The land that had been assessed at $240,000 as a residential property was now worth somewhere between $600,000 and $800,000 as a commercial parcel. Beulah read us the name of one of the developers who'd filed an interest letter. I recognized the LLC immediately. It was one of 4 that Wendell had registered under various names over the past decade. I'd seen the paperwork once years ago, during a conversation about estate planning after our mother passed. Wendell had known about the rezoning before the fire. I sat in Felix's mail truck in the parking lot of the distribution center and tried to absorb the mathematics of what I was looking at. My brother knew my property was about to be worth 3 times what I thought it was worth. He let me lose it, or helped me lose it. I still didn't know the extent of his involvement, and then moved to position himself to acquire it at distressed property prices while I was too desperate to fight back. "Holt," Felix said carefully, "I have to ask you something. Ask the fire investigator. Was the case fully closed?" I looked at him. The investigator had ruled it an electrical fault. Old wiring. I'd accepted that because I had no reason not to, because I was exhausted and grief-stricken, and 61 years old and my house was gone, and sometimes things just happen to people. But Felix was right to ask, because if Wendell had known about the rezoning, and if the timeline of events was as deliberate as everything else, then the question of how a house with 3-year-old inspected wiring catches fire at 2 in the morning deserved a second look. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I called the Decatur Fire Investigation Office and asked whether it was possible to request a supplemental review of a closed case. The woman I spoke to was patient and professional. She said that if I had new information that bore on the determination, I could submit it in writing and a senior investigator would review it. I was in the middle of writing that letter when Felix texted me. "She's here, at your building." He was parked on his route 2 blocks away. He'd seen Claudette's white Range Rover circling the block around my apartment building for 20 minutes. I called Felix back. "What is she doing sitting?" he said. "Watching the entrance. She's been on her phone the whole time." I thought about the job rejections, the calls about my reliability, the person who would know my professional references, my former supervisors, the specific details that would make a fabricated concern sound credible. Wendell would know all of that, but Claudette would know how to deliver it. She was the one who dealt with vendors, contractors, the delicate social architecture of business relationships. She knew how to make things happen through phone calls. I had Felix take a photograph of the Range Rover from where he was parked. Then I called my cousin Adele, who was a paralegal in Macon and who had always been the clearest-headed person in our family. I told her everything, the rezoning, the LLC, the job calls, Claudette watching my building. There was a long silence on the line. "Holt," Adele said. "When your mama passed, Wendell handled the estate." "I know. Did you ever see the full accounting?" I thought back. Our mother had died 4 years ago, a small woman with a large garden and a lifetime of careful saving. She'd owned her house in Augusta outright, paid off 20 years earlier. She'd had a pension from her years as a school secretary. She'd had a small investment account that she'd never touched, adding to it every year from her pension surplus. Wendell had handled the estate because he was the one who lived closest to Augusta, and because he knew how to read legal documents, and because I had trusted him the way you trust a brother. He'd told me the house sold quickly at a low price because of the condition of the roof. He'd told me the investment account had been mostly depleted by medical bills she'd run up in the last 2 years. He'd given me $12,000 as my share of the estate, and I had thanked him and never asked to see the paperwork. "Adel," I said. "Yeah, how do I find out what things were actually worth?" She told me. "Probate records are public in Georgia. The estate filing would show the assessed values, the debts claimed, the distributions made. If anything had been misrepresented, the paper trail was sitting in the Augusta courthouse. It took her 2 days to pull the records. She drove there herself on a Saturday. She called me from the courthouse parking lot. "Holt," she said, "the house sold for $342,000. I sat down on my kitchen floor. He told me it went for $140. "I know what he told you." Her voice was steady but tight. "The investment account had just under $90,000 in it when she passed. He claimed medical debt of $62,000 against it. I've got a request in for the medical billing records. You want to know what I think? Tell me. I think your brother has been stealing from you for a very long time." I stayed on the kitchen floor for a while after she hung up. I thought about the things I'd given up over the past 4 years, the decisions I'd made based on what I thought I had. I'd been careful with my retirement savings because I believed I'd received less from my mother's estate than I should have. I'd sold my truck because I was worried about the money. I'd said no to my son when he asked if I could fly to Portland for his daughter's first birthday, because I told myself I couldn't afford the flight. Wendell had been at that birthday party. I'd seen the pictures. Felix came by that evening. I told him what Adele had found. He sat in the chair and listened to all of it without interrupting. "You're going to need a lawyer," he said when I finished. "I know, a real one. Not county legal aid, though they're good people. I mean someone who handles estate fraud and elder financial abuse. There's a firm in Buckhead that Annette's father used when something similar happened with his brother." He pulled out his phone and found the name. "They don't take cases they don't believe in." The firm was Callaway and Morrow. I called Monday morning. The intake attorney, a young woman named Priscilla who sounded 25 but asked questions like someone twice that age, listened to the full story without interrupting. At the end, she said, "Can you get us the probate records and any documentation you have of the rezoning timeline?" I told her I already had them. "Give us a week," she said. While I waited, Wendell called. He'd been calling once a week since the fire, checking in, asking how I was doing, offering occasional mild suggestions about my situation that never included an offer of actual assistance. I'd been answering, I answered now. "How's the new place?" he asked. "It's fine," I said. "I've been going through some paperwork lately, financial stuff, looking back at things." A pause. "Small but there." "Oh yeah, what kind of things?" "The estate, Mama's house. I've been trying to get a full picture of my finances going forward." Another pause, longer this time. "That was all settled years ago, Holt. I don't know what you'd find worth going back to." "Probably nothing," I said. "Just being thorough." He suggested we get lunch sometime. I said that sounded nice. We hung up. 40 minutes later, Felix texted me a photo. Wendell's silver Lexus was parked outside my building. This time he wasn't alone. There was another man with him, someone Felix described as broad and quiet, standing near the entrance of my building, with the air of someone who was there to do something specific. I was already out the back door before Felix finished the description. He picked me up 2 blocks over, and we drove to a coffee shop in Tucker and sat there for 3 hours while I called Priscilla at Callaway and Morrow and told her what was happening. "Don't go home tonight," she said, which was not what a lawyer usually says. "Is there somewhere safe you can stay?" Felix answered that question without being asked. Annette made up the guest room. Their daughters had left twin beds behind when they went to college, and the room smelled like laundry detergent and the kind of normalcy I hadn't felt in months. I sat at their kitchen table and ate a plate of food Annette put in front of me without explaining what it was, and I ate all of it. "You've got people," Felix told me that night, as we sat on their porch after Annette went to bed. "Whatever your brother thinks he's done to isolate you, he didn't count on that." He was right. Wendell had spent months working to make sure I stayed desperate and alone, sabotaging job applications, positioning himself to acquire my land, possibly covering up worse than that. He'd assumed I had no one to ask for help, no one who would notice what he was doing, no one who would drive to Augusta on a Saturday to pull courthouse records for me. He'd underestimated what it means when you make a genuine friend. Priscilla moved faster than I expected. Within 10 days, she'd filed a motion to suspend any pending property transactions involving my Decatur lot, citing an ongoing fraud investigation into the estate of my mother. The motion created enough legal uncertainty that Wendell's preferred buyer, the LLC I recognized from the rezoning filings, backed away from the deal. Wendell called me 4 times that day. I didn't answer. He drove to Felix and Annette's house that evening. He didn't know I was staying there. He had my address wrong. He'd sent someone to the apartment building in Chamblee, and I wasn't there. When Priscilla told me later what he'd done, trying to locate me through former colleagues, through the Postal Service's HR office, through a man I'd once considered a mutual friend, I felt something settle and solidify inside me. This wasn't desperation. This was panic. He knew the walls were closing. I met Wendell 2 weeks later at a restaurant in Midtown, a place Priscilla chose because it had good sight lines and management she knew personally. I brought nothing except the knowledge of what I'd found, and I let him talk first. He was polished. He always had been. He talked about family and about the challenges I'd been through, and about how much he and Claudette wanted to see me back on my feet. He mentioned, with what he probably thought was subtlety, that he had connections in commercial real estate, and that if I wanted to sell the Decatur lot quickly, he could help me find a fair buyer. "How fair?" I asked. He named a number. It was $280,000, for land that was worth $600,000. "That's interesting," I said, "because I know what it's actually worth. And I know why you know what it's actually worth. And I know you knew before the fire." The polish cracked, just slightly, just enough. "The rezoning was public record, Holt. I was just trying to—" "Tell me about Mama's house," I said. The crack widened. I laid out what Adele and Priscilla had found. Not all of it at once. Felix had taught me something about patience, about letting people tell you who they are when they have to fill a silence. Every time Wendell offered an explanation, I just waited, and he'd fill the quiet with another version that didn't quite match the one before. By the time the lunch crowd had thinned, he'd told 3 different stories about the medical bills. He'd implied twice that our mother had known about and approved the distribution. He'd suggested that the difference in the sale price was a fee he'd paid to facilitate the transaction. "Wendell," I said finally, putting my hands flat on the table, "I have the probate documents. I have the actual sale records. I have a firm that specializes in exactly this kind of case, and they are very interested in what they've found. I also have the fire investigator's supervisor's contact information and a written request for supplemental review. What I want to know is what you want to do about it." He was very still. "What do you want?" he asked. "I want my share of Mama's estate. The real share. I want full market value for the Decatur lot, which you don't get to purchase. I want a signed accounting of every transaction you made as executor of that estate. And I want to never speak to you again unless it's through an attorney. Or Priscilla files everything she has with the Fulton County DA's office and the Georgia Secretary of State's office, and the fire investigation gets a second look, and we let the system sort it out." Wendell was quiet for a long time. Outside, a bus went by. Somewhere in the kitchen, someone dropped a pan. "You could have just talked to me," he said. "You changed your mind about the couch before I could pack a bag." He didn't say anything to that. The legal process took 8 months. Wendell's attorney tried twice to negotiate terms that would have protected Claudette from being named in the estate fraud complaint, and both times Priscilla declined. In the end, Wendell agreed to a full restitution arrangement. $164,000 representing my actual share of our mother's estate, plus the difference between what he'd claimed the house sold for and what it actually sold for, plus interest. The Decatur lot was sold to a legitimate developer through a proper bidding process, and I received every dollar of the proceeds. The fire investigation was reopened. The secondary review found evidence of accelerant in the basement that had been missed or overlooked in the original sweep. Wendell was never charged. The evidence was not conclusive enough for a criminal standard. But the civil settlement included a clause that I will not describe here except to say that his attorney fought very hard against it and failed. Wendell and Claudette sold the house in Roswell and moved to a smaller place in Alpharetta. From what I heard through Adele, the design studio closed. I didn't ask for details. I bought a house in Avondale Estates, a single-story brick place with a workshop in the back that I spent 6 weeks making exactly the way I wanted. I planted a garden on the south side of the yard in the spring, the same vegetables my mother had grown. Pole beans, butter lettuce, the particular heirloom tomatoes she'd saved seeds from every year. I built a workbench from white oak, the first real project I'd taken on since losing all my tools in the fire, and I stood at it the first morning and just ran my hands along the surface and let myself feel it. Felix retired from the Postal Service the following January, 19 years plus the 6 months I'd known him. Annette threw a party at their house in Stone Mountain that went until midnight, and I sat at the table they'd sat me at the night. I needed somewhere safe to sleep and felt something that took me a while to identify. It was gratitude that it had time to settle into something permanent. I built him a rocking chair, white oak, same lumber as the workbench. It took me 3 weeks and I made 2 mistakes I had to correct, and the final product was the best piece of furniture I've ever made. He carries it to the back porch every morning and sits there with his coffee while Annette gets ready for school. He says the egg salad is still better. I tell him he's biased. We've been having that argument for 2 years and I expect we'll keep having it. My son came to visit in the fall. He stayed for 2 weeks longer than he'd originally planned, and we worked on the garden together, and I taught him how to use a hand plane the way my father had taught me. His daughter, my granddaughter, who had turned 2 while I couldn't afford a plane ticket, spent most of both weeks following me around the workshop asking what things were called. I told her every name I knew and made up 2 that I'm not sure I'll be able to walk back. There are people who will tell you that family is family and blood is blood, and you owe people things simply because you share a name or a history. I spent 60 years believing most of that. I believed it even while Wendell was at a birthday party I couldn't attend, even while Claudette was making phone calls to people who trusted her voice, even while I was sleeping in a motel that smelled like someone else's cigarettes. What I know now is what I should have known when Felix handed me a cup of coffee from his thermos without asking whether I wanted it. You don't earn family by accident of birth. You earn it by showing up in the dark, by driving past someone's stop and saying not yet, by making egg salad on whole wheat because you remembered one thing someone told you once. The wooden box my father made is gone. All those birthday cards. The letter about my son's birth. I'm not going to pretend that doesn't still hurt, because it does. Some mornings more than others. But I am sitting in a house that belongs to me, in a chair I built with my own hands, with a garden that's already starting to show what it's going to be. And I have people. The kind you don't find by accident. The kind that find you at 5:30 in the morning with a thermos and absolutely no interest in being thanked for it. That's the kind of family worth keeping.